10 different games complete across multiple consoles, hundreds of thousands of zombies killed, and a simple photographer who once covered wars, you know. Hey everyone, today we're doing a video all about the Dead Rising series. To me, these are the quintessential zombie mayhem games. They also just recently came out with a sort of remaster of the original game. I figured what better time to dive into this than now. Originally released on the Xbox 360, the original Dead Rising games have been re-released onto a ton of different platforms since then. Other than the graphical upgrade, these versions have little to no changes, and even include bugs from the original. Because of this, for the first few main games in the series, I am playing the 2016 remasters using a PS5, with the only difference really being better textures and frame rates. So just be aware that while the first few games look like this in my video, if you play the original versions, it'd be more like this. Anyways though, it's been a long time since I've gotten to dive into this world, and I'm very excited. So let's just jump right into this, starting with the game that kicked off the entire series. First up here is the original Dead Rising, which came out in 2006 for the Xbox 360. This game follows a photojournalist named Frank West who gets a hot tip that something strange is going down in the city of Willamette, Colorado. After seeing a bunch of things that he can't quite explain on the fly in, he disembarks on the rooftop of a giant shopping mall, telling the helicopter pilot to return for him in 3 days. The first character you meet is a mysterious person named Carlito, and after exploring the mall a little bit, you come across a crazed doctor named Barnaby. Right before this awful woman here destroys the barricades that are keeping the zombies out, Frank then escapes to the security room, which is sealed off from the rest of the mall, where he meets Jesse and Brad, two government agents tasked with finding and protecting Dr. Barnaby. It's a little bit hard for me to talk about the graphics as they're going to vary depending on which version you're playing, but overall I think they did a pretty good job. The one thing that I think they absolutely nailed in this game is the overall feeling and vibe of the mall itself. Everything from the various stores that you visit, the lighting, the gentle music that plays, it all does an extremely good job of capturing the essence of that confusing and way too big shopping mall that everyone has been to. The main goal of Dead Rising is to solve the mystery of what started the outbreak. Frank only has 3 days until the helicopter that's coming back will pick him up, and the time limit in this game can be very unforgiving. That being said, you're not expected to save everyone or do everything on your first playthrough. More often than not, you're probably going to miss a critical mission early on and have to start over if you want to actually complete the story. To its credit though, this game actually accounts for this with its ingenious New Game Plus mode, where every time you start a new campaign, you have the option of carrying over all of Frank's levels from the previous playthrough, which makes it significantly easier. As Frank levels, he gets increased inventory slots to hold different weapons, more health, he runs faster, and learns unarmed combat moves, all of which go a long way in helping you master this game. Also, just by playing the game, you're going to become more and more familiar with the shopping mall itself. For example, which locations connect to which, where the various shortcuts are located, and where you can go to restock on different weapons or healing items. Learning the mall and the best places to go for various things and then having that pay off in the playthrough is extremely satisfying. Throughout your escapades, you come across a variety of new outfits that you can wear. Almost anything that you can see can be used to fight with, to varying degrees of success. Experimenting with the different weapons and defeating the zombies in unique ways is half the fun of this game. You can also take photographs of the zombies, survivors, and other points of interest throughout the mall, some of which are used for plot purposes. Dead Rising is built entirely around escort missions, with your secondary objective in this game being to rescue as many people as possible from the mall and bring them back to the security room. The character Otis in the security room will regularly call you with new scoops and survivor missions. Often you're going to need to help the survivors that you find out of a tight situation, or convince them to come with you. This is also unfortunately where I encountered the most issues in this game, because the survivor AI in Dead Rising 1 is just flat out bad. All of them die extremely easily, and while you can give weapons to some or even carry them to help prevent this, there are some NPCs where there's just very little that you can actually do, and this gets exponentially worse the more people you have following you. The survivors will often pick the path of most resistance, or lag behind aimlessly for no apparent reason, and then even if you get them back to the security room, they still require more babysitting, because some of them will actually try and mutiny and take other survivors with them, and you have to talk them down or bring them specific items. Another aspect of this game is boss battles against super beefed up characters known as psychopaths. These boss battles feel like a legitimate test of your abilities, especially early on in the game, and they're usually equal parts fun and frustrating. Following the main story and completing the case files, you learn that the man from the roof lured Dr. Barnaby to the mall and is also the one who started the outbreak. He did this as a way to get back at the United States government for a massive cover cover-up they did in his hometown, Santa Cabeza. There was another zombie outbreak there years prior, and the military was called in to basically wipe the city off the map. Dr. Barnaby, who was the head of the research lab there, eventually admits this before becoming a zombie himself, and then in a last-ditch effort, Carlito tries to blow up the entire mall, and Brad sacrifices himself to try and take him down. You team up with Carlito's sister Isabella, and after disabling the jamming device that prevents outgoing calls, the army eventually shows up to once again stage another cover-up. Otis does manage to escape with all the survivors that you rescue, and this is the one time in the entire game that he doesn't call you, but Jesse unfortunately also becomes a zombie, and when Frank gets to the roof on the third day, he sees his own ticket out of there get taken down by a zombie stowaway, which leaves him stuck in the mall. This unlocks overtime mode, where Frank is saved by Isabella, but is revealed to also be infected. As a medical technician who was at the Santa Cabeza research facility, Isabella is actually able to make a drug that suppresses the zombie infection. They also discover that Carlito may have infected a bunch of orphans and suppressed the zombie infection using a similar drug, and then flown them to various parts of the United States, essentially serving as ticking zombie time bombs. Frank and Isabella manage to escape the mall, and then Frank faces off against Brock, finally defeating him, before letting out a scream of anguish, and the screen cuts to black. It's revealed that Frank did indeed escape Willamette, and that the government was forced to admit partial culpability in the entire fiasco, but otherwise the entire incident fades from public memory. There's also quite a few achievements to wrangle in Dead Rising, some of which are totally fine, and some of which are notoriously bad. Infinity Mode is a completely different game mode. It involves needing to eat food regularly to restore Frank's health, which is slowly depleting, and killing various psychopaths and survivors who spawn in specific locations to get their loot, which is mainly food. The mode itself is fun, but the achievement is not. As a game to just grab some random stuff and kill zombies in the most creative ways possible, Dead Rising is a ton of fun to play. But even beyond that, it has a compelling story and a surprisingly addictive gameplay loop. It's definitely not perfect, with the main factors that brought it down for me being the survivor AI, the annoying final section of the game, certain boss fights. I also found the photography aspect a lot less fun than intended. All that being said though, there's a lot of depth here, with so many different ways to enjoy a playthrough. And as a result of that, Dead Rising 1 gets a very high A rank from me. The more time you spend in this world, the easier and more fun it becomes. And while the time limit can be a bit intimidating, you definitely get used to it pretty quick. Dead Rising also provides a pretty cutting commentary of journalism in the face of tragedies and horrific events, which is an angle I wasn't really expecting going in. And while some moments in this game haven't necessarily aged the best, it is from 2006 after all, the majority of it still holds up really well. I definitely think this game is still worth playing. Grab your camera, laser sword, favorite outfit, and just go to town. At some point, Capcom decided that it would be in their best interest to try and capitalize on the growing market of players who owned a Wii, which led to ports of games from some of their well-known franchises. Dead Rising Chop Till You Drop is very unique in that it's one of the few games released for the Wii that's actually rated M for mature. It's a reimagining of the first Dead Rising game, following the same story, but with radically different gameplay. It still starts with Frank West flying in on a helicopter and getting stranded in the shopping mall, and then trying to discover the cause of the outbreak and save as many people as possible before he escapes in 3 days. The same basic story missions and case files appear, and you also rescue many of the same characters, but the way it's all done is very different. You now view everything from an overhead view behind Frank, and there's a much larger focus on using guns as opposed to normal hand-to-hand weapons. Aiming guns actually felt pretty intuitive, although hand-to-hand combat now felt really awkward and unresponsive. To access Frank's inventory, you now actually have to go into a menu, but there is still limited inventory space, so at least they got that right. As you level up, this will increase, as does your health and also weapon durability. Weirdly enough, you can only carry one melee weapon at a time, but you're able to hold as many guns as you want. You'll still find various costumes in the mall, and you can mix and match the different pieces to create a look that you like, but there are several, like the Lego head, that are rendered completely impractical because they massively obstruct your field of view when you fire your gun. Food and weapons are now haphazardly strewn across the ground and will respawn every time you leave an area, making the security room in particular very important for restocking on food. Ammo now also drops from killing zombies, as does cash, which can be used at the gun shop to purchase new guns, magazines, and ammo capacity upgrades. The entire photography aspect has been completely cut from the game. You don't naturally come across survivors or missions missions as you explore, and Otis won't be calling you while you're out and about to give you new scoops. Instead, you accept individual survivor-specific missions from Otis at the security room, which are then timed. When you complete these missions, you're given a rank based on how well you did. In between these survivor missions, you can actually freely explore them all, and this is where you do the main case files. Instead of things happening at specific times, new missions just get unlocked as others are completed, and because of this, the actual 3-day timer isn't present. The survivors that you rescue are also done in a completely different order than the original game, and they'll sometimes have unique dialogue to make them fit into the narrative earlier. The character of Cletus is also completely retooled. After you defeat his psychopath form, he then becomes the gun vendor that you can buy from. Because of the new mission system and the fact that the main case files don't unlock until you complete everything that Otis has for you, you also pretty much have to save every survivor in the game. Saving all of the survivors feels a lot slower because you can only do individual missions. The most survivors that you ever bring back at once is 3, and it really made me wish that I could just combine different missions and bring back multiple groups. The mall itself is more or less the same, but it has been shrunken down a bit, and the various pathways that you could previously traverse have now been blocked off using barricades that you can't get around. You don't have the option of picking which path to take anymore and are just funneled into where the game wants you to go. Something else I avoided talking about, but you've probably noticed by now, is that this game has received a real visual downgrade. The cutscenes are also now all pre-rendered, meaning that you don't get to see Frank in his funny outfits during any of the important plot points. The amount of zombies that can be shown on screen at once is also significantly less, and to combat that, this version does brag about the introduction of zombie birds and dogs, which are just really annoying to deal with and better off avoided whenever possible. There's also special zombie variants of characters from the original game who don't appear otherwise. For example, the policewoman Joe, Kent, or Cliff. Certain parts of the game are also turned into QuickTime events, like escaping the convicts with Sophie or chasing down Carlito in the car. The boss fights are particularly rough in this game because none of them have visible health bars. The strategy for most of these was to just get to a relatively safe area and shoot them, trading hits back and forth until eventually one of you dies. You'll also notice that during most of the boss fights, zombies are strangely absent. They had to make a ton of concessions to get this to actually run on the Wii, and it shows. After saving all of the survivors and completing all of the case files, there's only one ending that you can acquire, unlike the original game which had multiple, which is the one where Frank's helicopter crashes and leads directly into overtime. You still need to get a bunch of different items for Frank to be able to stave off his zombification, after which you then go through the same tunnel in the clock tower. In the Wii version, you just have to straight up fight your way through. There's still the tank section and then a hand-to-hand battle with Brock, and this was straight up one of the worst boss fights I've ever seen in a video game. I thought the original version of this fight was bad, but this one is way worse. Killing Brock then nets you the same ending as the original, and then the credits roll. Beating the story unlocks some small challenges that you can access from the menu called Odd Jobs and Second Amendment. These bonus challenges are all bite-sized experiences and honestly are more fun than the base game. That being said, I did get tired of them pretty quickly as well. Chop Till You Drop was an interesting experiment, but it fails across the board for me. Frank's new controls made moving around awkward, which in turn made all of the combat, especially against the bosses, awkward, which in turn made this game less fun to play. The new additions like the zombie animals or the mini bosses were all annoying. The mall itself felt super cramped, and having to rescue all the different groups of survivors one by one meant that I got incredibly tired of making the exact same trip to the security room over and over. I did find the shooting mechanic to work pretty well, and I did think it was interesting to see the changes between the Wii version and the Xbox one, but that's more or less where I run out of nice things to say about this game. So with all of that in mind, I would give it a D rank. There is occasionally some fun to be had here, but it's hands down the worst version of the first Dead Rising. While it's not an absolutely horrible game in its own right, ranked as a Dead Rising game, it's definitely bottom tier for me. Leading up to the release of Dead Rising 2, Capcom decided to release a smaller Dead Rising title as a stopgap, the often forgotten and confusingly named Dead Rising 2 Case Zero. This bite-sized experience serves as a prologue to Dead Rising 2, following the new protagonist Chuck Greene as he escapes with his daughter in the aftermath of the Las Vegas outbreak. Case Zero features an original story and shines a spotlight on some of the new mechanics that would be present in the full Dead Rising 2. All of the levels and combo cards that you find find in this game would actually carry over into the main Dead Rising 2 game file, meaning you could potentially get a head start. Unfortunately though, this does not work if you play the remaster. Case Zero is set in a small town named Still Creek that Chuck and Katie get stranded in after someone steals their vehicle while they stop for gas. The town is very quickly overrun by zombies, and Chuck and Katie seek refuge inside of the gas station building to avoid them. Chuck explores the town and finds the drug Zombrex, which he gives to Katie, which helps prevent the zombie infection from spreading, and he also finds a broken motorcycle, which he then decides to repair so that they can escape the town, only having until nightfall to do so as military reinforcements will be arriving. Graphically, Case Zero is a bit rough to look at even when compared to the original version of Dead Rising 2. When you're running around out and about, everything looks fine, and the game actually has an interesting color palette that does give it some character, but close-ups of Chuck or especially Katie in cutscenes do not do them any favors. Case Zero does a pretty good job of giving you a slice of life of everything that you'll come across in the main game. For example, killing droves of zombies with random weapons, getting money, and also finding Zombrex for Katie and other survivors who need it. There's a small mission for one of the rescued survivors and even a boss battle against a psychopath. The only truly unique mechanic in this title is the assembly of the bike that you'll be using for the escape, which requires you to find the various bike parts throughout the town and then bring them back to repair it. This was also the first introduction of combo weapons, and there's a decent number of recipes for you to acquire and try out. You also do rescue a fair number of survivors throughout the course of the game, some of which will only join you if other survivors are also with you or other conditions are met. Story-wise, there's not a whole lot going on here. Chuck and Katie basically arrive in the town, fix the bike, and then escape. The game only has a runtime of a little over an hour, which is basically half a day in a regular Dead Rising game. To get the best ending, you need to have gotten multiple doses of Zombrex for Katie, and then you need to have defeated the mechanic psychopath and repaired your motorcycle and used it to escape. Rescuing all of the survivors is optional, but there's also few enough of them that it's not all that hard to do. Case Zero ends with the military arriving, and then there's a small section where Chuck rides his motorcycle out of the town. Chuck and Katie then find their truck further down the road after they escape, and after reclaiming their belongings from it, they keep on driving, with Chuck promising to keep Katie safe at all costs. There's only a handful of achievements to get, and as your levels and money carry over if you replay this game, you can pretty easily clear through all of them in just a couple of playthroughs at most. Case Zero is a bit of an odd game because it's extremely short and it serves as more of an introduction to the main characters and concepts that are present in actual Dead Rising 2, as opposed to standing on its own 2 feet. That being said, everything that it presents to you during the playthrough is done pretty well. With all of that in mind, I'd give Case Zero a very low B rank. I really wish that Case Zero had been included as a bonus chapter with the 2016 remaster of Dead Rising 2, because it works much better in tandem with that game instead of on its own. Still, if you're looking for a very tight and compact Dead Rising experience, and you're actually able to find a platform to play this on, it's pretty fun for the short amount of time that it lasts. Not surprisingly, next up is Dead Rising 2, which came out for both the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3, in addition to being included in the 2016 remasters. Dead Rising 2 starts off with Chuck performing in a zombie-killing pay-per-view reality TV show called Terror is Reality in order to earn money that he can use to buy Zombrex for his daughter Katie, who requires a dose of Zombrex every 24 hours or she will turn. After a playable section of the show, Chuck then goes to collect his daughter from the green room, but he's accosted by 2 of the performers, after which another zombie outbreak occurs and claims the lives of tons of different people. Chuck manages to escape with Katie to the security room, which is sealed shortly after, but the man in charge, Sullivan, informs him that there's no Zombrex on the premises. A reporter in the city then spreads footage of someone in Chuck's stage outfit releasing the zombies, naming him as the cause of the outbreak. And it is then up to Chuck Greene to clear his name, get Zombrex for his daughter Katie, and save as many people as possible before the military arrives in a few days to rescue them. Visually, Dead Rising 2 is a lot more detailed than the original, with a much larger variety of environments for you to explore, as well as a much bigger cast of characters and a greater variety in the zombies and bosses that you come across. The game also looks significantly better than Case Zero, despite releasing right after. The overall theming wasn't quite as strong as it was in the first game, but it does do a good job of capturing a Las Vegas-like experience. Despite the new locale, the game follows an extremely similar structure to the first Dead Rising, just with a few new twists and turns. You still go through vents to leave the security room, with your main goal being to discover the cause of the outbreak, and your secondary objective being to save as many people as possible. And you still get the majority of your survivor-based missions thanks to someone who watches the monitors in the security room and calls you about them. Although this time it's Stacy Forsyth, the leader of a zombie rights activist group named Cure, which is also being set up as responsible for the outbreak. Instead of being a reporter yourself, you instead team up with Rebecca Chang, the newswoman who initially identified Chuck as the cause of the outbreak. Much like the first game, while it is possible to rescue every single survivor in one playthrough, new players are not expected to be able to pull this off. The same New Game Plus mechanics do return here, where restarting the story carries over all of your levels and upgrades. While you're still able to use virtually any item that you find in the environment as a weapon, one of the big new changes to Dead Rising 2 is the addition of combo weapons, created by fusing two items or weapons together at a workbench. If you have the materials, you can make them without a recipe and they work just fine, although having the actual card unlock gives you more experience when using them. The large amount of possible combinations actually gives you a lot of options when it comes to combat, and you're definitely going to find favorite weapons as you go. You'll also gain access to a motorcycle that can be outfitted with chainsaws, making it significantly better than a standard vehicle. Dead Rising 2 has a much more open structure than the original game. The timer also feels less oppressive in this title, with you having a lot more downtime to experiment and mess around. Learning Fortune City and where the best places are to find weapons, as well as where you can find hidden Zombrex and the best places to farm cash, is still very satisfying. The survivor AI has definitely improved, and though it's still far from perfect, I did find it less frustrating overall to save people. Money plays a fairly large role in this game, allowing you to buy Zombrex and also weapons if you're low on them, as well as being required for certain missions where you need to pay people to join you. There's also an online co-op mode and several online minigames that you can play for both achievements and cash that Chuck can use in the main game, but unsurprisingly, you're probably going to struggle to find a match or people to play with. Speaking of achievements, there are a lot. Some of them were tedious, like having to kill over 70,000 zombies, but there weren't any that even came close to the difficulty of Infinity Mode from the first game. By completing the case files and following the story, you quickly learn that the host of the game show TK is actually responsible for causing the outbreak. TK uses the outbreak as cover so that he can rob the banks of the casinos, although Chuck is able to stop him. Rebecca's source is revealed to be the twins, and after defeating them, you confront TK as he tries to make his escape and manage to take him into custody. The army arrives shortly afterwards, but is overwhelmed when a new type of zombie appears. The safe house is overrun, and TK is bitten in the ensuing chaos. Chuck and company realize that the super zombies appeared when gas began pouring from vents in the ground, so Chuck then travels to the underground tunnels to discover the source, finding a hidden outpost of the company Phenotrans, the creators of the Zombrex drug. Upon returning to the security room to share his findings, Sullivan then kills Rebecca and takes the evidence, revealing himself to be a Phenotrans agent. Chuck chases Sullivan to the rooftop, and after a hand-to-hand battle, finally defeats him, calling into Rebecca's news station to have the survivors picked up from Fortune City before it gets firebombed by the government. If you gave TK Zombrex, Chuck gets a call from TK, which unlocks overtime mode. After sending Chuck on a scavenger hunt for various supplies, TK then knocks him out cold, and the two of them face off in another battle while Katie and Stacy are slowly being lowered into a crowd of zombies. After TK's inevitable defeat, the group walks away, presumably to safety. If you decided not to give TK Zombrex, you actually get the canon ending, where Chuck is ambushed by a zombified TK in an elevator when he goes back for Katie's belongings. Stacy and Katie are forced to leave Chuck behind, and then the screen fades to black, with Chuck's fate being left uncertain. Dead Rising 2 built on the already very solid foundation of the first game and refined it to be more fun in almost every single way. I found the combat a lot more fun thanks to the addition of combo weapons. The city that you get to explore was a lot more expansive, and the various characters that you meet were even more fleshed out than in the first game, and they were more memorable as a result. The story was pretty much on par with the first one for me, because although it didn't feel like it had quite as high of stakes, it was a lot more personal this time around. One of the only downgrades in my opinion is that Chuck himself is less of an interesting character than Frank was. He lacks a lot of the personality and energy that Frank brought to the first title. Otherwise though, in my opinion, Dead Rising 2 exceeds the first one in pretty much every way possible, leading me to give it an S rank. Dead Rising 2 is as close to perfect of a zombie mayhem simulator as I've yet to see. It offers a ton of variety in different ways to play, whether you want to follow the story and save everyone, or just mess around and pick up some weapons to massacre zombies with. It comes out on top as a really solid gaming experience, as long as it doesn't crash. While I haven't yet played every single game in the series, series, as of right now, this one is definitely my favorite. Now we're covering yet another one of the smaller Dead Rising adventures, Dead Rising 2 Case West. This game covers Frank West and Chuck Greene's infiltration of a Phenotrans facility immediately following the events of Dead Rising 2. Case West starts off showing the canon ending of Dead Rising 2, with Chuck being ambushed by the zombified TK in the elevator. A mysterious figure then shoots TK, allowing Chuck to escape, and the shooter is revealed to be none other than Frank West, who flew in on another helicopter to meet Rebecca. After Chuck informs him that Rebecca was killed during the events of Dead Rising 2, Frank reveals that the two of them were going to investigate a Phenotrans facility that was located not far away, and despite not fully trusting him, Frank allows Chuck to accompany him as they may be able to find evidence that would clear his name. Frank also reveals that he has a source within the facility, and this person assists them with being able to move throughout it as they search for the evidence. Visually, Case West looks pretty good for a game of its time. The visuals are an upgrade over the original Dead Rising 2, and while they don't quite hold up with the 2016 remaster, they're not far off. Frank in particular has a much more aged and grizzled look, which suits him, and the other returning characters also have been redesigned accordingly. Frank and Chuck's personalities are pretty much spot on, and they feel like they did in the previous games, which is something that the later entries of Dead Rising struggled with. Seeing the dynamic between the two of them was great, and it worked really well. Case West offers a very tight and compact Dead Rising experience with a variety of mechanics from the previous games returning. You still rescue survivors who are stranded in the facility, although instead of needing to escort them back to a base, they're all able to escape on their own. Combo weapons return, which still do require a workbench to create. Taking photographs also returns for the first time since Dead Rising 1, and this game also has online multiplayer, with the second player taking control of Frank, although as you can imagine, so many years down the line, good luck finding anyone to play this with. The AI for Frank West is actually pretty decent when he's following you around, and they made the smart decision of not giving him a health bar that you have to manage, so he's basically just a helpful addition to your team and not someone you have to babysit. Unfortunately though, he does have an annoying tendency to block doorways and generally get in the way. You actually start this game off at level 40, already having a large moveset, further cementing that this game is a direct sequel to Dead Rising 2 and is primarily intended for those who finish that game. Case West ditches the large open maps of the first few games in the series, and instead has you traversing small corridors and large rooms within the warehouse, and you never really have a safe room to fall back on other than a security room that you visit maybe 3 or 4 times. This gives Case West a very unique feel within the series, as pretty much every other game gives you a lot more room to play in. By following the story and doing the case files, you uncover that Phenotrans has actually been lying to the public about Zombrex being synthetic, instead harvesting it by turning various missing people into zombies, and they then staged the outbreak in Fortune City and potentially others when their supply of people was too low. Frank throws away his Zombrex in disgust after learning what was done to create it, and Chuck quietly picks it up. After exploding the power generator to enable them to escape, Frank's source inside the facility is revealed to be none other than Isabella Keyes, who was forced to work for Phenotrans or face jail time, and she has been working on a cure. After a fight against the only real psychopath in the game, Isabella is then captured, and the leader of Phenotrans then taunts them, saying that she has a cure but it hasn't been released because it would affect the company's profit margins. Chuck and Frank escape the facility, and Frank guesses that the talk of the cure might have been a lie. Chuck isn't sure that the people will believe the evidence they have, and as Frank realizes that he has no Zombrex left, Chuck then gives him the dose that he had picked up, telling him that the world still needs him. Case West is honestly a pretty simple game, and unlike pretty much any other Dead Rising entry, it is wholly focused on the story. You still rescue some survivors and do small quests for them, and you get to kill groups of zombies with various weapons, but this aspect is definitely toned down. As a result, it gives Case West a very different feel. The runtime of this title also isn't particularly long, somewhere between 1 and 2 hours, but much like Case Zero, it manages to make good use of said time while also delivering a compelling plot this time around. I actually really enjoyed Case West, and I appreciated that it wasn't bloated or overly long. While I did miss some of the zombie killing frenzy of the previous games, this one was clearly designed with something else in mind, and for the most part it worked. So with all of that in mind, I would actually give it a low A rank. For Case West to resonate with you, you definitely have to have finished the previous 2 Dead Rising games, but if you've done that, this is a pretty satisfying resolution to the majority of open plot threads from those titles. And unlike Case Zero, I do feel that it can stand on its own as a fun and unique title that once again I wish had been re-released alongside the remasters. It's a surprisingly fun and compelling entry in the series. Now we're covering Dead Rising's foray into the mobile gaming scene, with the aptly named Dead Rising Mobile. Despite releasing after Dead Rising 2, this game focuses entirely on the cast of the first Dead Rising game. There are 4 different playable characters, and you explore a shopping mall and complete missions somewhat similar to the original. First off, there's no real plot here. Regardless of which character you pick, the game starts off with the opening cutscene from the original Dead Rising, with Frank jumping out of a helicopter onto the roof of the mall, and then your chosen character spawns within the mall and walks forward to find a note, which seems to be from another survivor and tells you about the existence of mad zombies, who the writer thinks is responsible for the current outbreak. Your level, quests, and progress on each character is tracked individually, and there are some subtle differences between the different characters, including the special moves that they can perform and their animations and walk speed. Jesse in particular seems to be the slowest character, and Carlito seemed to be the best one as he has a charging attack that you can trigger at any time. Each character will get the same kind of missions, although the missions themselves are a bit randomized, and the game will play out exactly the same regardless of who you're playing as. Graphically, it looks about what you'd expect from a 3D mobile game from this era. Generally speaking, I actually thought the majority of the environments and the zombies looked pretty solid, and because it uses official Dead Rising assets and 3D models, a lot of the items that you find in the environment are instantly recognizable. The mall itself is entirely unique, although it does have a few areas that are reminiscent of the original game. The gameplay is based around context-sensitive buttons that appear on the screen of the phone. When you're near an item, you can pick it up, tapping on the bat icon causes you to swing your weapon, and occasionally there's other things you can do, like open doors or use special moves. All of the different characters feel extremely tanky to move around, and the camera is one of this game's worst features. A lot of the time you just cannot see what you're actually looking or aiming at, and for some reason they decided to bring back the hunger meter from Dead Rising's Infinity mode. You need to be constantly looking for food throughout the mall to refill this gauge, because if it ever depletes to 0, you start taking damage and you'll eventually die. Using special moves also drains this faster. The food does not respawn in the mall, so once it's been eaten, it's gone. However, it does reset at 4 AM along with the different missions. That being said though, death is not super punishing in Dead Rising Mobile. You basically respawn in the same area where you were, just having lost your inventory of items and any experience towards the next level. There is a mechanic where after you died, you could send out a rescue call and other players would have the chance to revive you, but obviously so many years down the line, this doesn't function anymore. The main point of Dead Rising Mobile is to complete the various missions that are given to you. As you kill zombies throughout the mall, a gauge on the left hand of your screen will slowly fill up, and when it reaches the maximum, 1 or more of these mad zombies will spawn, up to a maximum of 5 per day. And to be able to beat Dead Rising Mobile, you actually need to kill 15 of these mad zombies. So Dead Rising Mobile ends with you fighting 2 mad zombies at once, after which the ending E cutscene plays from the original Dead Rising, where Frank escapes with the survivors but doesn't solve the mystery. Regardless of which character you beat the game with, this ending cutscene is the exact same. If you try and continue playing on the same character afterwards, you'll start the game over from the beginning, but with your levels intact. Dead Rising Mobile was definitely not great. Compared to the other games in the Dead Rising series, it definitely falls towards the bottom of the list. It had really tanky and awkward controls, 0 plot or story, and the missions were extremely repetitive, making the entire experience very tedious. So with all of this in mind, I'd give it an F rank. While it's not a completely awful game on its own, trying to beat it is extremely boring, and that's just not something you should be able to say about a game based around killing zombies in the most inventive ways possible. It definitely seems like they did the best that they could for the time, but time has not been kind to it. It is fun to look at and talk about as an odd curiosity in the series, but I would recommend steering clear of actually playing it yourself if possible. And because the game is no longer available on the App Store and hasn't been for many years, that should be pretty easy to accomplish. Now we're jumping into Dead Rising 2 Off the Record, which is one of the weirdest ideas for a video game that I've ever seen in any franchise. Off the Record is a reimagining of Dead Rising 2, but instead of Chuck Greene, it stars a washed-up Frank West in the title role. It poses a what-if scenario of what if Frank West had actually been there, forced to compete in Terror is Reality after his star power has waned following the Willamette incident. The majority of this game is a repeat of what happened in Dead Rising 2, although the story does differ in some regards. Off the Record starts with a cutscene detailing Frank's fall from grace before he's thrown into his own Terror is Reality challenge to complete. When leaving the show, Frank witnesses a meeting where TK is convincing Brandon to set off the explosion that would unleash the zombies. Frank is then stuck in an elevator when the outbreak actually happens, mirroring the original game. After making his way to the safe room, Frank then goes out into the mall to find Zombrex and also save anyone that he can while he's out there. On one of his return trips to the safe house, he witnesses Rebecca Chang doing a news report showing a tape of Brandon setting off the explosion and then placing the blame for the outbreak entirely on Stacy and the group Cure. Stacy then asks for Frank's help in clearing her name, and he agrees to find the truth and get to the bottom of the story. Graphically, it looks about the same as the original Dead Rising 2, with Frank seeming to use his character model from Case West. The new area that they added to the game does look pretty cool, like a futuristic theme park, and it's complete with various themed rides and stores. The basic gameplay is the same as it was in the original Dead Rising 2, where you can use almost anything in the environment as a weapon, and also combine various weapons together inside of maintenance rooms to create combo weapons. Off the Record also adds several new combo weapons to try out. You no longer have to worry about giving Katie Zombrex back in the security room, instead needing it for Frank himself, and it can be administered anywhere you are. Outside of solving the mystery, the big focus of the game is, as per usual, saving as many people as you can. And unfortunately, the survivor AI actually seems to be worse in Off the Record. They constantly get stuck on the environment or on each other, and I had multiple survivors actually kill each other as they were attacking zombies. I found it much more frustrating this time around. There were a couple of unique survivors that you meet, but it was mostly the same cast as the first time. There is a new checkpoint system after you enter an area, so if you forgot to save and end up getting killed, it's not quite as punishing as it used to be. That is, unless the game crashes, in which case you have to reload a save anyways. And while this game was not as buggy as the PS4 remaster of Dead Rising 2, it still crashed multiple times. Photographs return, as do PP stickers throughout the mall that you need to find. The psychopaths do return, with one new addition in the form of a clown, who is actually the brother of Adam the Clown that you fought in the first Dead Rising. Chuck also makes a cameo as a psychopath and provides some pretty cutting commentary on the series as a whole. The looters also now have a much bigger presence in the game, and honestly, it was really annoying. There's also a separate sandbox mode which is attached to your save file, and in this you can explore them all with infinite time, and the cash and experience that you gather will transfer over to the story mode. Random characters and psychopaths will appear throughout, kind of similar to the original Infinity mode of Dead Rising 1. This can be a good option for learning where everything is in Fortune City and also just messing around, but there's also specific challenges for you to complete, and getting gold on them is tied to the various trophies and achievements. Speaking of, there's a fair few trophies to track down, including some that are really obscure, like getting the very first survivor you rescue, Denise, to attack the head of the army when he arrives multiple days later, but otherwise they're pretty run-of-the-mill and honestly easier than the trophies in Dead Rising 2. The story follows pretty closely to the original game, with one of the small changes being that Rebecca gets kidnapped after you prevent TK from robbing the bank vaults, and he then holds her for $1 million ransom. After Frank goes down to the sewers and discovers the source of the gas zombies, he then brings evidence back to the safe room, and it's actually Stacy that is revealed to be a Phoenix agent, and she's the one who shoots Rebecca and then kills Sullivan. Frank then has to destroy machines that are designed to harvest the queens, and after he chases Stacy into the Uranus zone, she pilots a giant robot that you need to fight as the final boss. After eventually winning, Frank then calls Rebecca's news team to come and pick them up, and if you gave TK Zombrex, it leads directly into overtime mode, which is more or less the same as it was in the original game, except that TK kidnapped the still alive Rebecca. After performing the same scavenger hunt, you get thrown into a repeat of the Terror is Reality event from the start of the game, and then a hand-to-hand combat fight with TK, where you just need to intermittently heal Rebecca so that she doesn't die. After TK is eventually defeated, Frank carries Rebecca and the two of them walk off together, presumably to safety. So Off the Record is a very unique experiment, as I've never really seen a company try and overwrite some of their games like this before. I do like some of the things that Off the Record brought to the table, but I also found that the story left a lot to be desired. It feels like they came up with the ending where Sullivan is now the good guy and Stacy works for Phoenitrans purely to defy expectations. There's also certain things that make zero sense, and just overall the plot was so similar to the original Dead Rising 2 that it didn't really leave much of an impact. Off the Record also cranks the absurdity up to 11, showcased by things like the new clown psychopath or even the final boss fight. I mean, it's a giant robot. So taking all of that into account, I would give Off the Record a B rank. It's a very fun game if you just want to mess around, and it is cool to see Frank back in the driver's seat again, but if you're looking for anything deeper than that, I would still suggest the original 2 Dead Rising games. There are some very fun moments, and I absolutely loved the psychopath battle against Chuck Greene, but there's just not enough original content here to make it worth your time if you've played Dead Rising 2, and especially knowing that everything that happens is considered entirely non-canon, it ultimately just ends ends up feeling like a disposable experience, although still pretty fun. Now we're covering Dead Rising 3, the first game that feels like a huge departure from the previous entries. It originally came out on the Xbox One and then later on the PC, dubbed the Apocalypse Edition. Dead Rising 3 skews into much darker territory, and while it still does contain a lot of the elements of a Dead Rising game, it feels very much like its own thing as opposed to just building on what had come before it. You start this title off playing as Nick Ramos, exploring a quarantine zone to see if you're able to escape the city after there's been a huge outbreak. Rendezvousing at the diner, you meet Annie, an infected person who needs Zombrex. The diner quickly gets overrun, and Nick and his boss Rhonda take refuge in her garage. Nick meets an old friend of his named Diego, who has a similar tattoo to him on their neck, and Diego then reveals that he has a plane that needs repair. Nick unfortunately gets bitten and then sets off to find Zombrex to prevent himself from turning, as well as getting fuel and various parts to fix the plane. Dead Rising 3 has a very dark and grungy aesthetic to it, looking very different from the more cartoony style of the previous games. That being said, the characters do still retain a lot of the usual Dead Rising flair. The main psychopaths that you fight especially stick out for their designs, and they were actually all based on the 7 deadly sins. The map that you get to explore in Dead Rising 3 is huge, significantly bigger than any of the previous games. To the credit of the developers, it's also filled with tons of explorable areas. A huge amount of the buildings you come across have interiors. There's often guns and other collectibles up on the roofs. Using vehicles plays a much bigger part of this game as you need to travel larger distances, and you can also use said vehicles as platforms to get up onto higher ledges, leading this game to have a much more exploratory feel to it. There's still a timer, however it's extremely forgiving. Story missions now immediately lead into the next one as opposed to taking place at specific times, meaning that you can blast through the majority of them very quickly if you want to, although the game does force you to take breaks here and there and explore in between some of the missions. Nick gets a walkie-talkie near the start of the game, and the guy on the other end feeds you information about different side missions, such as psychopath battles and survivors to rescue. The survivor AI is very much improved, with most of the survivors who will join you being able to handle themselves easily. That being said though, a lot of the survivor missions did feel a bit dumb. If you get too far from a survivor that's following you, they'll automatically return to the safe house. They can also be taken out to follow you around or put back using these designated safe houses, and here you're also able to freely change between the different clothing outfits that you found, as well as get some gear and weapons. Saving can also now be done at any time in the game as opposed to exclusively using bathrooms. Combo weapons make a huge return with literally dozens of recipes, and instead of needing to make them at a workbench, you can create them anywhere. There's a ton of different options to play around with and see what works for you. Combo vehicles is a new feature that was added to this title, where Nick, as a mechanic, can combine various different cars and the like into much more powerful versions. My personal favorite is the Roller Hog, because I really enjoyed mowing down zombies in this thing, and you get it very early in the story. Leveling up now rewards you with points, which can be spent on this screen to pick the perks that you want to upgrade. By following the story, you break into a morgue to try and find Zombrex, assisted by this character Gary, but unfortunately they're all out and Nick waits to turn, eventually realizing that even though he's been bitten, somehow he's immune. While you were initially going to turn Annie over to Gary, who was looking for her on orders of his boss, you instead find a different way allying with these infected people to get the supplies that you need. Diego and Nick both get captured, shortly after which Isabella Keyes finds Nick, promising to explain everything to him. It's revealed that Nick and Diego were both orphans that were sent through the country by Carlito as part of his original plan in the first Dead Rising game. However, one orphan was engineered with immunity, that person being Nick. The leader of Annie's resistance turns on Nick for the bounty on his head, and after Nick defeats him, Gary's boss then arrives, revealing himself to be Chuck Greene, and Annie is revealed to actually be Katie, who you know from Dead Rising 2. Shortly after this, overtime mode is unlocked, where the army tries to harvest king zombies to be able to start future outbreaks. After preventing the general in charge from completing said harvest, Nick then fights him one-on-one and eventually wins, with Annie and the crew on their way to pick him back up as the credits roll. In a post-credits scene, it's revealed that Isabella actually orchestrated the outbreak to force Nick to come forward, wanting to use his immunity to make a cure. Dead Rising 3 is also unique in the series in that it technically contains some content and mechanics that can't be accessed anymore. You'll be prompted to use the Xbox Smart Glass app, which allows allow you to open up these supply boxes and even had a few unique story missions. You did this by running the app on your phone while playing, and you unlocked new missions and tasks by picking up these app updates in-game. As you've probably guessed though, the Xbox Smart Glass app was retired years and years ago, and it does not run on a modern phone. I was able to install a backup of the app onto an old tablet, and it will let me log in. However, once it tries to connect to the Xbox servers, it then freezes and quits. The PC version of Dead Rising 3 omits this content entirely, never even referencing it. Dead Rising 3 also has a fair amount of DLC to play through. The first is a group of missions called Untold Stories, which dive into the backstories of various semi-important characters who pop up throughout the main game. The problem with this DLC though is that it really excels at making you spend way too long playing as extremely insufferable people that you don't really care about. The runtime of each of these was well over an hour. The only character who wasn't completely awful was the last one, but his story also misses context, as it looks like the intro to it is probably from those missing Smart Glass missions. For the most part, I found the DLC extremely disposable. The only episode I found worth playing was the final one, because it does offer resolution to some of the plot threads and character fates from the first DLC pack and the main game. The second DLC pack seems to have only been released on Xbox. In this game mode, you can pick from 4 playable characters, and then you're given small missions in various locations throughout the city, like destroying bombs or rescuing people. There are power-ups that you can pick up, coins, a score, super moves, and a live announcer commentating over all of it. It can be played multiplayer, but again, good luck finding people to play with. I honestly didn't really get this DLC or its appeal. It's fun in really short bursts to do a level or a challenge, but it's really strange, and I got tired of it pretty quickly. The arcade remix achievements are the only ones on the Xbox One version of this game that I haven't gotten. Speaking of, the achievements for Dead Rising 3 are all pretty run-of-the-mill with nothing really egregious standing out. There's lots of collectibles that you have to get to fill them in, but as they all give experience or new combo weapons that you can build, the majority of these were worth finding and came naturally over the course of a playthrough. All in all, Dead Rising 3 can be a lot of fun to play, but across the board there's also a lot of areas where it fails. The vast array of combo weapons is pretty cool, but it basically renders normal weapons a bit useless. The improved survivor AI is nice to have, but the missions to get these followers generally weren't that great. While the game tries to tie into the larger Dead Rising story at the end, it ends up feeling a bit tacked on, with the big reveal of Annie actually being Katie falling pretty flat. The DLC also did really little for me, and if anything it brought the game down, as did the knowledge of the missing Smart Glass content. That being said though, driving around mowing down armies of zombies was at its finest here, and the gameplay was very fluid and quite fun. So with all of that in mind, Dead Rising 3 would get a high C rank from me. It can be a lot of fun in the right context, but plenty of the core concepts that make up a Dead Rising game have been changed so much that it loses a lot of the charm and silly nature of the previous games. It's definitely not the worst Dead Rising game, but it's also a ways away from being the best, landing somewhere right in the middle. Now we're covering what is probably the most maligned entry in the entire series, Dead Rising 4, which came out for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, as well as PC. Dead Rising 4 opens up with Frank West reliving some past memories through a dream, which allows you to learn the new controls and also get a brief refresher on some of the story so far. You then follow Frank being escorted to a research facility near Willamette by his student Vicky, and after Frank is talked into it, the pair of them then investigate what's going on, discovering that despite there being a cure and a vaccination for the zombie virus, there are actually some zombies at this facility and they're being kept and experimented on. Frank and Vic manage to get some hard evidence, but Frank's unwillingness to involve himself beyond documenting what is happening actually causes Vic to abandon him, and he then becomes a wanted man. Sometime later, Brad Park from the Dead Rising 3 DLC actually tracks him down. Brad reveals that there's some kind of cover-up happening once again in Willamette, and convinces Frank to join him in exposing what's happening to help clear his name. While flying over the city in a helicopter, they get shot down, but they both survive, and Frank quickly then ditches Brad and explores the mall and the city, looking for clues as to the cause of the outbreak, as well as tracking down Vic, who is also there. First things first, the game itself looks fine when it comes to the graphics, though it more or less just looks like an average game from this period, missing any of the stylizations or personality that had been in the previous entries. One of the biggest changes that you're going to notice in this game, though, is that Frank West has gotten a complete overhaul, and this doesn't just extend extend to how he looks, his voice actor, and even his personality are very different. I will say that the voice acting was pretty solid in this game overall, and that's a good thing because hopefully you like the sound of the new Frank's voice, because the character literally does not shut up. I don't think there was ever more than 15 or 20 seconds while playing without him quipping a one-liner. Dead Rising 4 primarily takes place around Christmas, with the outbreak having started during Black Friday at the opening of a new mega mall in Willamette. This mall itself is pretty detailed, but the heavy Christmas theming does rob it of a lot of the personality it would have otherwise had. You also barely spend any time in this mall because after the first couple of chapters, there's not really a reason to return as you're exploring the larger city. A lot of mechanics from the previous Dead Rising titles do return. Frank is still upgraded with points that he gets when he levels, like in Dead Rising 3, allowing you to pick which upgrades you want and slowly making him stronger over time. Combo weapons and combo vehicles also return with a bunch of new recipes, and one of the big new features that this game brings to the table is exosuits. Putting these on makes Frank extremely powerful, and there's specific weapons that can be used while wearing said suits, although eventually these suits do run out of energy and break unless you're in a few specific areas, mainly plot related. I found controlling Frank a little bit harder when you're wearing the suit, but even just in general, I found him surprisingly clunky and unwieldy to control. The camera mechanic also returns in this game in a big way, with you needing to photograph evidence as you continue along the story. This is a huge game mechanic, with the game often completely stopping until you photograph specific things which allow you to progress. Thanks to camera filters that Vic installed at the beginning of the game, there's also a night vision mode, as well as a specific mode that lets you see things that are more or less invisible, and you can even use it to view thumbprints on scanners and even hack computers using it. The more survivors that you rescue in each area, the more upgraded that these safe rooms will become, with different vendors and more things that you can buy while there. There are a couple of survivors that have quests that you need to complete for them, but the vast majority of survivors that you come across, you just need to clear the zombies that are around them, and then they'll drop some loot and run away. Psychopath battles have also been mostly removed from Dead Rising 4, replaced instead with much smaller encounters with enemies that are called maniacs. None of the maniacs get those interesting cutscenes or storylines, and unlike the bosses from previous games where there's usually a weak point or strategy to exploit, for the maniacs you basically just hit them a couple times, roll away, rinse and repeat until they're dead. And other than the DLC, which we'll get into later, there's also no time limit in Dead Rising 4. The main focus of the plot is a feud between Frank and his student Vic. In the previous games, Frank was a photojournalist intent on uncovering the truth. In this game, he's a huge jerk that's mainly intent on one-upping his former student. This kind of dynamic where there's two people reporting on the same story with a back and forth was handled a lot better and off the record. So it really just feels out of place, and there's way too much emphasis put on this throughout the story. Speaking of, if you follow the story, you quickly bump up against a military group named Obscurus, who you realize are doing everything in their power to capture and transport a monster in Willamette called Calder. Frank teams up with a resistance group that's fighting Obscurus, and quickly partners up with an engineer named Hammond, and by doing so he's actually able to track down Calder, learning in the process that Dr. Barnaby from the very first game was actually stationed in Willamette for a while, and was doing research to try and create intelligent zombies down in a lab. By reviewing some footage, Frank is able to find out that Calder is actually a former soldier from Obscurus, who was accidentally turned into a super zombie when he was investigating Barnaby's lab. Frank eventually tracks Calder down to his lair in the sewers. You then escape from Calder with the hard drive, only for Vic to take it and destroy it, and then you chase after her through the mall in an extremely annoying section, at the end of which you finally fight Calder properly, and do so to save Vic, which causes her to finally decide to help you. After Calder is defeated, Vic reveals that she saved the SD card from your camera before it was destroyed, meaning that you still have your story. You meet up with Brad and then battle your way to the rooftop, but as the three of you escape, zombies manage to grab onto Frank, and he sacrifices himself so that the others can escape. Vic Chu then narrates the final case file, promising to tell Frank's story and make sure that it's the truth, because apparently she thinks that this version of Frank would have made things up and lied about what actually happened. This then leads directly into the DLC called Frank Rising, and you actually get to control a zombified Frank killing humans. You have an entirely hand-based moveset, and you actually feed on zombies and other people to regain health. This is probably the most fun and inventive thing that the entire game did, and unfortunately it's locked behind a DLC. Your ally Hammond finds you, and then a doctor who was working with Barnaby applies a treatment to you, slowly turning you into an intelligent zombie. You find out that the military is going to be firebombing the city, which gives you an hour and a half to try and save the people left in Willamette and also find a cure for your zombification. This DLC actually does have a time limit like a normal Dead Rising game. Dr. Blackburn has a change of heart apart and betrays you to Obscurus because she doesn't want to lose you as a scientific specimen. However, by fighting your way through to her, you're able to force her to help you and reverse the zombification process. There's a couple of different endings to the DLC, including one where Frank and everyone get away, and thanks to Vic, he becomes famous again. In addition to Frank Rising, there's several other DLC packs released for Dead Rising 4, the first of which is called Super Ultra Dead Rising 4 Mini Golf, where you play as several different characters in exosuits on different mini golf courses. These courses are filled with zombies and Frank commentates. This just did not deliver on the fun for me. There's also a bunch of DLC costumes, as well as a few that will change the aesthetic and how the zombies look. There's quite a few trophies and achievements to hunt down, but honestly, this game didn't hold my attention long enough for me to want to go out of my way to do them. And Dead Rising 4 is also quite glitchy, almost as bad as the PS4 remaster of Dead Rising 2. As you can probably tell from this glowing review, I did not particularly enjoy Dead Rising 4. It had a ton of super annoying mechanics, it left out a ton of things that make a Dead Rising game a Dead Rising game, and even most of the returning stuff felt a little bit off. I didn't initially hate it, but as more time went on, I definitely found myself having a bad time. That being said, there were some flashes of fun spread throughout, so I wouldn't consider this game an absolute total failure, and instead I would give it a low D rank, just slightly above an F. Dead Rising 4 just feels like a pretty mediocre third-person action game. Everything about it, including the gameplay and the characters, felt either dumbed down or changed so much to be unrecognizable. If they ever do make another new Dead Rising game, I very much hope that they go back to the drawing board and look at what made the other games fun and successful, because this just wasn't it. Now it's time to cover the most recent Dead Rising game released as of the making of this video, the somewhat confusingly named Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster. DRDR, as it's called, falls somewhere between a remaster and a full-on remake. Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster starts off in the same way that every other version of this game has, with Frank West flying into Willamette, Colorado on a helicopter. After realizing that something is very wrong in the city, he tells the pilot to drop him off and come back for him in 3 days, and then he jumps out of the helicopter onto the rooftop of the giant mega mall. Frank then meets Carlito on the roof, who gives him some cryptic hints about what's going on, and shortly afterwards the entire mall is invaded by zombies. Frank then meets up with two DHS agents named Jesse and Brad in the security room, and Frank goes on a journey to discover the cause of the zombie outbreak and save as many people as possible. By solving the various cases, Frank soon learns that Carlito unleashed the zombies on the mall as revenge against the United States government for a massive cover-up that they did in his hometown of Santa Cabeza, where there was a research facility that had been trying to make zombified cattle. After the zombie virus escaped containment and started infecting people, the United States Army was called in and they effectively destroyed the town, wiping it off the map. Carlito managed to lure the head of the research station named Dr. Barnaby to the mall, and this is who Jesse and Brad are tasked with protecting. Frank and the group eventually team up with Carlito's sister Isabella, and after Carlito's main plan fails, he then attempts to blow up the mall. However, they do manage to stop this, although Brad does not come out alive. Frank manages to get the password to Carlito's computer before he dies, and they use it to remove the jamming device so that Jesse can actually call her headquarters, only to discover that the United States government is going to deny all knowledge of what happened and wipe the city off the map like they did with Santa Cabeza. Jesse ultimately also loses her life, having been bitten by a zombified Dr. Barnaby, and at the end of the 3 days, when Frank's helicopter finally arrives, it gets taken down by a zombie stowaway. Frank then collapses on the roof, but is saved by Isabella, which starts the overtime mode, where it is revealed that he is also infected with the zombie virus, but Isabella is actually able to create a medicine to block the infection after Frank gathers several different supplies for her. The two of them then escape the mega mall, and Frank fights against Brock, the army commander who was also responsible for the Santa Cabeza cleanup, and after defeating him, he finally manages to escape the city with his story. So first off, this remaster looks wildly different from the original, and it has a much different feel. The mall itself has received a fresh coat of paint, and it's immediately obvious. There are some points in this game where the graphics legitimately look amazing, but I will say that the shiny new style causes the mall itself to lose a lot of the atmosphere and personality that it had in the original game, because in that title it perfectly captured what an actual big mall looked and felt like. In this version, it instead just looks and feels like any other good-looking environment you'd see in a modern game. While there are some characters who look pretty similar to their original counterparts, Frank and Brad both look wildly different, which is something that you'll need to get used to. This game doesn't go for a full realism aesthetic, instead aiming for a more cartoony vibe with the character design, designs, which reminds me of a lot more polished version of Dead Rising 3. I do think that this works for the most part, but every once in a while I did get some Uncanny Valley vibes. The characters are also now fully voiced, and mainly by different people than in the original. Overall though, I think the voice cast is pretty solid, and the dramatic chops of the voice actors made the game feel a lot less campy and more dark and grim. Dead Rising Deluxe Remake allows you to choose from 2 different control schemes. There are a wide variety of tweaks to things like the controls and the menu UI. Possibly the biggest change in this game though is Frank's ability to skip time by looking at his watch when at a save point. This can make the game significantly faster, especially if you're trophy hunting and only need to get to a specific point. Frank still levels up the same way, with his health, speed, and inventory increasing as he does, but experience points are also a lot easier to come by in this version, especially when it comes to taking pictures, with the photography mechanic having been tweaked significantly. Dead Rising Deluxe Remake is still all about the escort missions, and the survivors have also seen some noticeable changes. Mainly in regards to their AI, there was significantly less babysitting, with most of the survivors being able to properly navigate areas and avoid the zombies. Rescuing every single survivor in one run now also rewards you with a magazine that will give you infinite durability on weapons, and this basically means infinite ammo for guns. The psychopaths have also been tweaked accordingly, and when you land consecutive hits on them, they do significantly less damage, meaning that the main strategy for all of them is pretty much to just land 1 or 2 attacks, roll away, rinse and repeat, reminding me a lot of Dead Rising 4. This made a lot of the psychopaths a lot more annoying and longer to defeat than they were in the original, and I honestly prefer the combat how it used to be. There's still a pretty long list of trophies that you need to get in this game, with most of them returning from the original, but easier. And the notorious 7-day survivor achievement for Infinity Mode does return, but Infinity Mode itself has been completely revamped. Instead of survivors and psychopaths appearing at specific times and places, they now spawn somewhat randomly throughout the mall, and you can view them on your map. You still need to collect food to replenish your constantly depleting health, but one nice addition is that you're also able to fast forward time here as well. I was able to finish up this trophy in about 2 hours of playing as opposed to the constant 14 hours of the original version. So all in all, where does the Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster fall on the scale of Dead Rising games? For me, it's somewhere around the middle. The darker tone, new visual style, and new control scheme made the game feel like it lacked a lot of personality compared to the original. Most of the changes and alterations to the characters and psychopaths didn't bother me all that much, but I also don't think that it really improved the game in any meaningful way. If given the choice, I would probably still return to the 2016 remaster as my preferred version of the game. So with all of that in mind, I'd give the Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster a low B rank. It is a fun game, and it still manages to keep a lot of the spirit of the original while also being a lot easier to play. So as an entry point to the series, I would actually recommend it. But that being said, if you're looking for the pure and intense zombie mayhem experience that the Dead Rising series can offer, this would not be my go-to recommendation. So that about does it for the video. I had a lot of fun playing through these games, and there were a bunch that I'd never really gotten to try out before, so it was super cool to finally get to experience them. I had originally thought that the first Dead Rising game was going to be my #1 pick, but much to my surprise, I actually prefer what was done in the second entry overall, although both of the original games are very solid. I also clearly see why the series has declined over time, with every entry after Case West changing too many core mechanics that make a Dead Rising game what it is, leading to the series slowly going downhill and feeling less and less unique as time goes on. If you've played through the Dead Rising games, I'd love to hear your experience with them and also your rankings down in the comments below. And I'll be back soon with yet another video on another game series. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. Take care.